Hello Barrington, I hope you're ready for some more science today because I've got a special episode all about friction. So what is friction? Well, it's a force that slows things down, eventually. Some stuff slows down faster than other stuff, and we're obsessed with making stuff slow down even slower. If you're confused, don't worry, I'll explain everything. But the important thing to know is that it happens when two surfaces rub together, and we are obsessed with trying to reduce friction. Let me show you. You see, to get something moving, you have to burn fuel. That's what you put in the petrol tank. But once you've burned the fuel and you're going at a speed, friction tries to slow you down. So you have to burn even more fuel to speed up again, and then you have to burn even more fuel to speed up even more because friction's slowing you down even more. And that's bad, because it costs a lot of money for fuel. So that's why cars have wheels. Wheels are low friction. Another bad thing about friction is it creates heat. For example, if you rub your hands together really fast, it feels really hot. Ah! This is bad for your car. After all, you don't want your car getting hot. That's why they're low friction. If they weren't low friction, something awful could happen. Mama! Okay, so how does it all work? Well, I told you before that friction acts between two surfaces. And the surfaces move relative to one another, and they kind of get stuck on each other. There's some resistance caused here which slows them down. Now, if we got a magnifier out and looked closer at these surfaces, we'd see the surface look something like this. And the other surface would look like this. Now you can see how these two surfaces are going to get caught on one another. Similarly, if you try to move your hands over each other in a flat way, they can move much more freely than if you stick your fingers out. Your fingers will get locked together. And that's like the little peaks and troughs and the little mountains and hills in the microscopic surface. So how do we reduce friction? Well, one way of reducing friction is to have as small a surface rubbing together as possible. You can see that if there was a really, really big surface rubbing together with a really, really big surface, you'd have lots and lots of friction. Two small surfaces rubbing together will reduce the friction. So one way of reducing friction is to have as little surface touching as little surface as possible. Now here's a little pen toy that I have had since I was a boy. It works on magnetism. When you place the pen just right, it will actually hover. So the magnets are repelling the pen. There's also a magnet in the pen. And the only thing that the pen is touching is this tiny, tiny, tiny end here. So this is a really nice low friction toy. If I give it a spin, it should spin for ages. And that's because there's very little of the pen touching the base. Give it a try. You can see it dances around a bit. And it's finally stopped. Pretty good, huh? Another cool toy I've had since I was a child is this. It's a hypnotic spinner. Very effective. And it spins for such a long time. If you look on the bottom, you can see how it works. There's a tiny, tiny dent which sticks out above the rest. And when you place it flat, it sort of balances on that tiny point. Very low friction. I can give it a spin. It's like we're going into a black hole, look. Whoa, amazing. I've also got this gyroscope, which is very old now. You can see it's quite battered. It's designed to do science experiments with, and I might show you some of those at some point, but it also spins a very long time. And it's controlled by these little screws here, which hold the gyroscope in place on that very, very tiny pointed piece of metal there and there. So there's very little in contact with the gyroscope itself, very little friction. And it also spins for a good long time. So that's kind of cool. Now going back to this drawing just for a second, another way we can reduce friction is to somehow fill in these bumps to provide a smoother surface. And one way that we could do that is with some liquid substance that would fill the gaps a little bit and allow the two surfaces to slide freely over one another. And we have a name for that liquid. It's called oil. And a lot of things with moving parts, moving surfaces require oil to help reduce friction in those parts that rub together. Now I've got a model steam engine here, and one of the things that it comes with is a bottle of lubrication oil. Lubrication just means to reduce friction. And before you use it, you need to give it some oil in all the parts that move and rub together. So before using the steam train, I would be oiling up the axles, all of the wheels, anywhere that I thought was going to move, basically. And that would allow the steam engine to work at its best. If I didn't do that, it would have a hard time turning this at all, I think. So oil, very, very important. Now, we used to use steam trains a lot on our railway lines, and they were really bad for the environment because you were forever having to put lots and lots of oil on them. And the railway lines were covered in black oil. They used to leak and drip oil really wherever they went. We do have to put oil in cars, but we don't have to put as much. And that's due to a revolutionary invention called the bearing. So I'm going to show you one of those now. So I was holding this earlier. This is a fidget spinner. And a fidget spinner works by using this amazing invention, a bearing. And it's the reason why we don't have to put lots of oil on a fidget spinner. Fidget spinner has low friction without needing lots and lots of oil. So if I take this fidget spinner apart, I should be able to see the bearing inside and explain to you how it works and what it does. And there's the bearing inside. Let me see how close I can get. Can you see the little balls moving around in there? That is the bearing. And it's one of the most amazing inventions that they're used almost everywhere in the world. I can't think of many things that spin and rotate that don't have a bearing nowadays. I'm going to explain how they work. These are ball bearings. And they take their name from the invention they're used in, the bearing. They're hard steel metal balls, like marbles really. And it's these that are inside the bearing that allow the bearing to move with very low friction. Let me show you how they work. Imagine this is our two surfaces inside the bearing. And they fit together like this. Now, as I slide one against the other, I have to work quite hard to overcome the friction because I'm pushing these two pieces together. And because it's such a long track, there's actually quite a lot of friction generated and quite a lot of heat as well. If this was moving really, really quickly, I might even melt the plastic, and then that would be the bearing ruined. So the bearing works by adding ball bearings to this. Now, when I move the two pieces, you can see that each ball bearing inside the bearing revolves and acts as a little tiny wheel, if they don't fall out. But this is very, very low friction now. It almost feels like ice. And my bearing is moving really, really freely. Now, ball bearings are in almost everything. These ones would be from something small, like a car. And these ones I got from a factory. And these would have been used in a really, really big bearing, maybe in something like a power station or something like that. You can see each one is big enough to hold in my hand, and they're really, really heavy as well. Right down to the smallest bearings used on tiny little electric control cars or electric control drones, really, really small motors. Ball bearings are in everything, and it's all about friction. Now, one thing you might have at home to play around with is some marbles. And these are really just as smooth and round as the metal ball bearings I showed you earlier. And you can have a play with these and see just how they affect the friction of things. So I've got a sort of a tin lid here, and if I carefully flip this over, oh, I might lose a few, but all the marbles are now under there, and you can see it gives me a really low friction. Oh, look at that. My very own bearing. I can spin that, and it's like spinning it on ice. And it moves around in an odd way as well. Kind of coasts around a little bit like a wheel. So if you've got some marbles at home, have a little play, put them under something and see if you can create your own low friction bearing. Just a little something to try at home there. Now another thing you can try at home is spinning some coins. A coin has a very thin edge that it spins on, and so that's a very low friction system. I've got a few different coins here. You might want to try spinning a coin on some paper, which is a slightly rougher surface. You can see it stopped quite quickly there. Or you could try spinning a coin on something a bit smoother, like this piece of plastic I've got. You can see especially that last part lasts a lot longer, doesn't it? So what's happening there? Well, of course the paper is a rougher surface. It's got more mountains and valleys in it, and they're catching on the metal of the coin as it spins and slowing the coin down more. If you spin the coin on a smooth surface like this, there's less to catch on the coin, there's less friction, and so the coin will slow down a bit slower. You can spin something heavier and it will last longer. And that's because when you spin a heavy coin, you're putting more energy into it. You're having to work harder to spin the heavy coin. And so there's more energy, we call it kinetic energy, the energy of movement in the coin. And because there's more energy to lose, it will spin for longer. A nice finish there. Now I could make this even smoother. I've got here a mirror. Hello. And the mirror's even smoother, so in theory, the coin should spin for even longer on the mirror. Let's give it a try. Not bad. The very, very smooth surface of the mirror and the very, very smooth surface of the coin. Very low friction. I like that. So the last thing I'm going to show you is with a really, really big coin. Well, it's not a coin actually. It's a heavy metal disc. And it's got a rounded edge here as well, which is designed to be even lower friction than the straight edge of a coin. And this is called an Euler's disc. And it's designed to show the movement of a cylinder, or it's a squash cylinder, like this, and show how low friction can impact its movement. So I'm going to give it a spin now, and I will show you what happens. There we go. Euler's disc. A very low friction system. Whew. Well, that's quite enough mad science for one day, I think. Why not try it yourself at home? Give it a spin.